Unmasking Trauma, the collective journey to healing and connection. Welcome, everyone, to another riveting episode of the Black CEO podcast. I'm your host, and today we're diving deep into a topic that touches every single one of us, whether we realize it or not. We're about to embark on a journey that will challenge your perceptions, tug at your heartstrings, and quite possibly change the way you view the world and your place in it. But before we dive in, I want to introduce you to the extraordinary individual who's inspired today's discussion. Kyra Davenport is not just a trauma expert or a community healer. She's a modern day alchemist, transforming pain into purpose, isolation into connection, and fear into courage. Her work has touched countless lives, from war-torn communities to bustling urban neighborhoods, leaving a trail of hope and resilience in her wake. Kyra doesn't just talk about healing, she embodies it, and her insights are about to shake up everything you thought you knew about trauma, community, and the human capacity for transformation. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking. Great, another talk about trauma. Just what I need to brighten my day. Trust me, I get it. The word trauma itself can be, well, traumatic, but stick with me, because what Kyra shared during our conversation is nothing short of revolutionary. It's not just about understanding trauma. It's about reimagining our entire approach to healing and community building. Imagine, if you will, a world where our wounds become our greatest source of connection. A place where vulnerability is celebrated as a superpower, not hidden as a weakness. Sounds like a fantasy, right? Well, buckle up, because we're about to explore how this seemingly utopian vision might just be within our grasp. Let's start with Kyra's first mind-bending insight. Trauma isn't just a personal problem, it's a collective experience. Now, I know that might sound a bit woo-woo at first, but hear me out. Think about the last time a tragedy struck your community. Maybe it was a natural disaster, an act of violence, or even a pandemic. Did you notice how the effects rippled out, touching everyone in some way, even those not directly involved? Kyra shared a powerful story that illustrates this point perfectly. She worked with a small town that had experienced a series of violent incidents. At first, the community's response was predictable. People retreated into their homes, fear became the dominant emotion, and mistrust grew like weeds in an untended garden. But here's where it gets interesting. Kyra didn't focus on individual therapy sessions or prescribing medication. Instead, she did something that at the time seemed counterintuitive. She brought people together. Now, I can almost hear some of you saying, bring traumatized people together. Are you trying to create a perfect storm of panic attacks? But hold on to your skepticism for just a moment longer. Kyra organized community healing circles. At first, attendance was sparse. People were hesitant, scared even. But slowly, something magical began to happen. As people shared their stories, they realized they weren't alone in their fear, their anger, their sense of helplessness. The woman who jumped at every loud noise found out her neighbor did too. The man who couldn't sleep discovered others were also lying awake, haunted by similar thoughts. This shared vulnerability became the foundation for something powerful. It was like watching a garden come to life after a long, harsh winter. Trust began to grow, relationships formed, and a sense of collective strength emerged. People who had never spoken before were now planning community watch programs, support groups, and neighborhood events. But here's the kicker: this wasn't just feel good kumbaya stuff. The town saw a measurable decrease in crime rates, an increase in community engagement, and even improvements in individual mental health outcomes, all because they faced their trauma together rather than in isolation. This leads us to Kyra's second groundbreaking insight: healing happens in relationship. Now, I know we live in a world that often glorifies self reliance. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps, right? Well, Kira's work suggests that when it comes to healing, we might need to rethink that approach. She explained that trauma at its core disrupts our ability to connect with others. It's like a computer virus that corrupts our relationship software. And just like you can't fix corrupted software in isolation, we can't fully heal from trauma without reconnecting with others. Kyra shared a particularly moving example of this principle in action. She worked with a group of women who had all experienced domestic violence. When they first started meeting, many of them could barely make eye contact. Their voices were soft, hesitant, as if they were still trying to make themselves invisible. But as they continued to meet, share their stories, and support each other, something remarkable happened. It was like watching flowers bloom in fast motion. Women who had once been too afraid to speak up were now using their voices not just for themselves, but for each other. They went from victims to advocates, not just for their own rights, but for the rights of others in similar situations. One woman, let's call her Sarah, went from being unable to leave her house to organizing community education programs about domestic violence. Another, we'll call her Maria, who had once believed she deserved the abuse she endured, was now counseling other women, helping them reclaim their sense of worth and power. This transformation wasn't just emotional, it was physical. Kyra noted how the women's postures changed, how they began to hold their heads high, how their voices grew stronger. It was as if by supporting each other, they were quite literally standing taller. But here's where it gets really interesting. The impact of this group didn't stop with the women themselves. As they healed and grew stronger, they began to affect change in their wider community. They lobbied for better protection laws, set up support networks, and even worked with local law enforcement to improve responses to domestic violence calls. The ripple effect of their collective healing touched countless lives. Now, I can almost hear some of you thinking, that's all well and good for them, but my trauma is different. My pain is too deep, too personal for this kumbaya stuff. And that brings us to Kara's third and perhaps most challenging insight. True healing requires us to step into discomfort. I know, I know. If you're anything like me, your first reaction to that statement is probably something along the lines of, thanks, but no thanks. I've had enough discomfort to last a lifetime. But stick with me, because this is where things get really interesting. Kyra argues that while our instinct is to avoid pain at all costs, it's often in facing our discomfort that we find our greatest growth. Now, let me be clear. This doesn't mean recklessly throwing ourselves into triggering situations. It's about creating safe, supportive environments where we can gradually expand our comfort zones and face the things we've been avoiding. Kyra shared a personal story that really drove this point home. For years after experiencing a traumatic event, she avoided anything that reminded her of it. Sounds reasonable, right? The problem was this avoidance was limiting her life in significant ways. It affected her relationships, her career choices, even the route she would take when driving. But with the support of her community, she slowly began to face her fears. And let me tell you, it wasn't a walk in the park. There were tears, there were setbacks, there were moments when she wanted to give up. But each small step forward built her resilience. Today, she says those experiences she once avoided are now sources of strength and wisdom she draws upon in her work. Now, I can see some of you nodding along, maybe even feeling a glimmer of hope, but I can also sense the skeptics out there. You're probably thinking, this all sounds great in theory, but how do we actually put it into practice? Well, my friends, I'm glad you asked. Kyra offered several practical strategies that any of us can start implementing today. First, start small. You don't need to organize a community-wide healing circle to make a difference. Begin by reaching out to one person. Maybe it's a neighbor you've never really talked to, or a coworker who seems to be struggling. Simply showing up and being present for someone else can be incredibly powerful. I remember a time when I was going through a tough period. I was putting on a brave face, but inside, I was falling apart. One day, a colleague I barely knew stopped by my desk and simply said, "Hey, I noticed you seem a bit down lately. If you ever want to grab a coffee and talk, I'm here." That simple gesture of connection meant more to me than any self help book or motivational speech ever could. Second, practice active listening. In our fast paced world, we often listen with the intent to respond rather than to understand. Kyra suggests trying this exercise. The next time someone is sharing something with you, focus entirely on what they're saying. Don't think about your response. Just listen. You might be surprised at how much deeper your connections become when you truly hear others. I tried this recently with my partner, and let me tell you, it was eye opening. I realized how often I had been formulating my response instead of truly listening. When I gave my full attention, not only did I understand them better, but they felt more heard and valued. It was like upgrading our relationship software in real time. Third, create space for authentic sharing. This could be as simple as hosting a potluck dinner where everyone shares a story about their name, or organizing a community art project where people express their hopes for the neighborhood. The key is to create opportunities for people to share parts of themselves they might not usually reveal. I was part of a community project like this once. We created a story wall where people could anonymously share their experiences of living in the neighborhood. The stories range from hilarious to heartbreaking, but each one helped us see our community and each other in a new light. It was like we had been living in black and white, and suddenly everything was in color. Fourth, Embrace discomfort as a teacher. The next time you feel uncomfortable in a social situation, instead of immediately retreating, get curious. What's causing the discomfort? What might you learn if you stay present with it? Remember, growth often happens at the edges of our comfort zones. I'll share a personal example here. I've always been terrified of public speaking. The thought of standing in front of a crowd made my palms sweat and my heart race. But instead of avoiding it, I joined a local Toastmasters group. Was it uncomfortable? Absolutely. Did I want to run away every time it was my turn to speak? You bet it. But by facing that discomfort head on in a supportive environment, I've not only become a better speaker, but I've also become more confident in other areas of my life. Fifth, practice self-compassion. Healing is not a linear process. There will be setbacks and difficult days. Kyra emphasizes the importance of treating ourselves with the same kindness and understanding we would offer a good friend. I struggle with this one, to be honest. I'm often my own harshest critic, but I'm learning to talk to myself the way I would talk to a loved one who's struggling. Instead of berating myself for having a bad day, I'm learning to say, hey, this is tough. It's okay to feel this way. What do you need right now? It's a small shift, but it's making a big difference in how I handle challenges. As we implement these strategies, it's important to remember that this work takes time. We're not just changing behaviors, we're shifting deeply ingrained patterns and beliefs. Kyra likens it to turning a large ship. It doesn't happen instantly, but with consistent, intentional effort, the course does change. Now, I want to address something that might be coming up for some of you. You might be thinking, this all sounds well and good, but my community is too divided. There's too much history, too much pain. I hear you. And so does Kyra. She's worked in communities torn apart by violence, prejudice, and generations of misunderstanding. And yet, time and time again, she's seen the transformative power of coming together. She shared a particularly moving story about two neighborhoods in a city that had been at odds for decades. There was a history of violence between the communities, and most people had given up hope of ever bridging the divide. Kyra and her team started by finding a few willing individuals from each side who were tired of the conflict. They began with small, facilitated conversations. And let me tell you, it wasn't pretty at first. There was anger, there were accusations, there were moments when it seemed like the whole thing might fall apart. But they kept showing up, they kept listening, and slowly, as people shared their stories, something remarkable began to happen. They started to see the humanity in each other. They realized that beneath the labels and stereotypes, they shared many of the same fears, hopes, and dreams. From these initial conversations, joint community projects emerged. They started small, cleaning up a shared park, organizing a children's sports league. As trust built, they tackled more significant issues together. Today, while challenges still exist, these once divided neighborhoods now collaborate on everything from youth programs to economic development initiatives. It's a powerful reminder that no divide is too great to bridge when we approach each other with openness and compassion. It's not about erasing our differences or pretending that hurt hasn't happened. It's about finding our shared humanity in spite of, or perhaps even because of, our differences and our pain. As we near the end of our time together, I want to circle back to the question we started with. Why do we sometimes feel stuck in patterns of pain and disconnection? Through Kyra's wisdom, we can see that it's often because we're trying to heal in isolation, forgetting that we're part of a larger whole. The good news is that the solution is within our reach. It doesn't require special skills or resources. It simply requires our willingness to show up for ourselves and for each other, to be vulnerable, to listen deeply, to step into discomfort with courage and compassion. Kyra's work reminds us that we have the power to create ripples of healing that extend far beyond ourselves. Every time we reach out to a neighbor, every time we choose understanding over judgment, every time we share our story or listen to someone else's, we're contributing to the healing of our entire community. But here's the thing. This isn't just about feeling good or singing kumbaya around a campfire. This is about fundamentally changing the way we approach our collective challenges. Imagine if we applied this mindset to our biggest societal issues: racism, inequality, climate change. What if instead of pointing fingers and retreating to our corners, we came together to share our fears, our hopes, our ideas for change? It's a radical idea, I know. In a world that often feels more divided than ever, the notion of coming together might seem naive, even impossible. But as Kyra's work shows us, it's not only possible, it's essential for our survival and thriving as a species. So here's my challenge to you. This week, I want you to take one small step towards collective healing. It could be as simple as striking up a conversation with someone you usually avoid or organizing a small gathering in your home or neighborhood. Maybe it's finally opening up to a friend about something you've been struggling with, or offering a listening ear to someone who seems to be having a hard time. Whatever it is, approach it with an open heart and a willingness to be surprised. Remember, every great movement, every significant change starts with a single step, a single conversation, a single moment of connection. And here's the beautiful thing: as you take that step, you're not just helping yourself or even just your immediate community. You're contributing to a larger shift, a ripple effect that has the potential to transform our world. Because when we heal together, when we connect authentically, when we face our challenges collectively, we're not just solving problems, we're creating a new way of being. Imagine a world where vulnerability is seen as strength, where differences are celebrated rather than feared, where pain becomes a portal to deeper connection rather than a wall that separates us. That world is possible, and it starts with each one of us choosing to step back into the light together. So, my friends, as we wrap up this episode, I want to leave you with this thought: healing is possible, not just for individuals, but for entire communities, for our society, for our world. And it starts with you. It starts with me. It starts with all of us right here, right now. Remember, in coming together, we don't just heal ourselves, we heal the world. Let's make it happen. One conversation, one connection, one community at a time. The world is waiting for your unique contribution to this grand project of collective healing. Are you ready to answer the call? Thank you for joining me on this journey today. Until next time, keep shining your light, keep reaching out, and keep believing in the power of collective healing. Together, we can create a world where trauma doesn't have the last word, connection does.